The price of gold hit a new record high today, nearly $5,600 an ounce, before dropping off just a little. Investors tend to flock to gold during tumultuous times, and other than sending the price skyrocketing, we were curious what other impacts that has. Daniel McDowell is a political scientist at Syracuse University.
I think there's a couple things that investors tend to think when they think about gold. This includes institutional investors like central banks, all the way down to individual retail investors like you and I, which is that gold is a safe place to be in times of crisis. It's a good hedge against instability. And it's also a good place to be when other major currencies, in particular the dollar, which is the world's most important currency, tend to get weaker or lose value. Gold historically tends to rise relative to that.
Do we know how long we have stored value in gold or considered it a form of currency?
Well, certainly there's evidence of human societies using gold as jewelry, as a sign of opulence and wealth, going back around 5, even 6,000 years. So it has a really long history in human societies. In terms of its use in currency, even that goes back thousands of years to Roman times and then all the way up until the early 20th century and even into the post-war period where the dollar was fixed to gold.
This is kind of a meta question, I guess, because, why does anything we use as currency have value? But is there anything special about gold and why we consider it so valuable?
Yeah, the things that people typically point to are, one, gold is scarce. And so generally speaking, humans, we tend to find things that are scarce in scarce supply to be more valuable than things that are plentiful, that are very easy to get. Gold's difficult to acquire, right? It takes a lot of time, a lot of money to dig it out of the ground. And so that's another factor. You can't just easily create more gold. And so there's not only is it in short supply to begin with, there's an understanding that the supply is not going to increase dramatically. And then lastly, it's beautiful. This bright yellow metal, it can be mixed with other metals and made into very durable, long-lasting jewelry. There's a sense of eternity that's tied up into gold, and I think that's part of its appeal too.
So there's a bit of the romance there in addition to the economics principles.
Yes.
So I want to follow the supply chain of gold here and ask what happens when the price skyrockets, starting with mining.
Sure.
Are gold miners really kicking into high gear all around the world right now?
Well, for sure. Look, mining is like any other industry. It's going to respond to financial incentives. And so when the price of gold goes up, we're seeing interest, for instance, even from countries. China is in talks to purchase a gold mine in Canada right now. So you're seeing government interest in getting into the mining space as well, which I think reflects that rising price as well.
So I have always been curious, if people are buying gold, does that mean it's getting loaded up onto planes and getting shipped all over the world to be transferred from a Swiss bank vault to somebody's home safe, something like that?
Certainly there is some physical movement from time to time. Large stocks of gold are custodied in certain places. There's a lot of gold that's custodied with the New York Fed, for instance. That's mostly sort of official government reserves. There's a lot of gold that's custodied in London as well. But obviously, you've got major refineries, places like Switzerland. There's also black markets for gold in different places around the world. And so at times, yes, it is moving, but I think probably less of that than we might imagine. A lot of it is just sort of shifting who owns gold that might be housed in a particular custodian location.
So you might buy gold, but it stays exactly where it is in the current vault, and the person who used to own it just doesn't have the paperwork to prove that they own it anymore. You now do.
Exactly. For instance, commercial banks will hold physical stocks of gold and then will be able to sell access to that gold to their clients. And so it might be that one client of the bank sells their ownership rights over that gold to another. It doesn't actually move one location. It's just who has the title to own it. That doesn't mean there aren't actual physical movements of gold. That does happen too, but probably less than we think of. Every time gold is bought and sold doesn't mean it's getting picked up and flown somewhere else in the world.
Clearly, I have never invested in gold before. Don't know how this all works. What about, when people buy gold and store it themselves? That does seem like they would need to actually put it on a plane and ship it. Where does it come from?
This has absolutely been something that's been happening over the last several years as interest in holding gold has risen. There's really kind of two markets. There's the physical gold market, which you're just asking about here. And these are folks who really want to buy 1 ounce ingots of gold and have them stored physically in a vault that is, in their home or in their business somewhere. In those cases, it might be that mines that are producing the gold are then shipping the unrefined gold to Switzerland, where it's being refined and purified, packaged, and then sold and physically flown from Europe to the United States. And so that could be one sort of pathway.
So gold is also a material. It is used in technology these days like smartphones. Is the high price right now impacting the supply chain for electronics or other stuff that includes gold as a material?
It's definitely causing, I think, some industries that rely on it, I would put silver in this category as well, to look for alternatives if they can. There may not always be an obvious alternative, but to the extent that you can say sub in something like copper instead of silver or instead of gold, then that might be appealing at a time when prices are so high. The only thing I would add there is that prices of a lot of these metals and commodities right now are kind of moving in kind. So even though copper is cheaper than silver by a long mile and much cheaper than gold, copper prices are up quite a bit now too. So all of these things right now are quite expensive.
You know a lot about this topic. Was there something that first got you interested in learning more about gold and its role in finance?
I'm mostly interested in international currencies and the role that the dollar plays in the world. And so part of that is being a student of history and understanding the dollar's evolving role over the last 100 years or so. And you have to understand the historic link between the dollar and gold. And you can go back again even further and think about the central role that gold had played in the international monetary system. And more recently, I became interested in central bank demand for gold, which has really been increasing over the last 15 years or so for various reasons. Part of that was a response to U.S. sanctions. And so we might note that Russia found that a lot of its U.S. Treasury holdings and Eurobond holdings were blocked or frozen after the invasion of Ukraine. But Russia also had a sizable amount of gold, physical gold in its own vaults. And of course, those investments were safe. And so this idea of gold being apolitical and something that is a shield against the weaponization of sovereign currencies is something that's fascinating to me.
Political science professor Daniel McDowell of Syracuse University talking us through the latest global gold rush.